So it is 12 o'clock, so we will get started. We probably will have a few people trickling in as we go along, but it is 12, so we'll get started. My name is Zoe, and I am the Nature Kids Program Coordinator here at Nature Alberta, and I've been hosting these webinars since December, so this is the final one of this series, all about the Grassland region. So I'd just like to welcome everyone. So these webinars were made possible with funding from the Wildlife Habitat Canada, and they're all about the important bird and biodiversity areas program in Alberta. So the focus of these webinars was to draw attention to the IBA program and to help raise awareness on what we as Nature Alberta and our partners are doing to support this program. So this is a 1-hour webinar and will run until 1 p.m. If you have any questions, you are welcome to ask them in the Q&A section on the right-hand side of the screen, and we will address them at the end of the webinar. Also, you can make a comment if you can't hear me very well. I can turn up my mic as well. So starting off, we'd like to thank everyone for attending, and we'd also like to thank our special guests who will be presenting today. Andrew Couturier, who is a Senior Analyst with Bird Studies Canada, and Brook Skagen, who is an active IBA caretaker in the Grassland region. So to start off this webinar, I would like to discuss a little bit about what Nature Alberta is, who we are, and what we do. So Nature Alberta is a federation of Alberta naturalists established in 1970. We have 35 natural history member clubs, and we are a charitable organization. We encourage Albertans to increase their knowledge and understanding of natural history and ecological processes. We promote the exchange of data and information among clubs and other conservation organizations. We also provide a unified voice for naturalists on conservation issues. So we have 3 core programs: Living by Water, Nature Kids, and the Birds and Biodiversity program. So the Living by Water program focuses on outreach and presentations, one-on-one consultations with lake property owners, beneficial management practices implementation, and the Love Your Lake program. Nature Kids engages children ages 4 to 12 through educational materials and field experiences. We offer free public events called Family Nature Nights, and we offer several benefits with our family memberships, such as the home-based learning program called Nature Heroes. The Birds and Biodiversity program's cornerstone is the Important Bird and Biodiversity Areas program. So Nature Alberta oversees the regional IBA Caretaker network in Alberta. Alright, so this presentation is focusing on the IBA program. So this program was first initiated in Canada by BirdLife International in the 1980s. This program identifies, monitors, and protects the most critical bird and biodiversity hotspots internationally. It effectively directs conservation efforts and is coordinated nationally by Nature Canada and Bird Studies Canada. Caretakers collect and maintain information for the IBAs, which we will get into in a little more detail in the following slides. Okay, so the IBAs in Alberta. So this is a map of all of the IBAs within Alberta, and they're divided into 3 regions, so the Boreal region, the Parkland region, and the Grassland region. This webinar is focused on the Grassland region of Alberta, which is the section in yellowy green in the southern part of the map. So Alberta is home to 47 IBAs, but currently only 10 of those areas are being monitored by caretakers. The purpose of these webinars is to spread awareness about this program and increase the number of caretakers involved in the IBA program. So how is Nature Alberta involved? So in every province there is a caretakers network for the IBAs across Canada. Nature Alberta supports the IBA Caretaker Network in Alberta by recruiting caretakers, enlisting community and government support for IBA conservation, and oversees the review of IBA site summary information in the province. Nature Alberta also provides caretakers with workshop training and development. This webinar series is another outcome from our 2016 workshop, where we heard the need to increase the profile of IBAs and caretakers. So now I will pass the presentation on to Andrew, who will tell you more about the IBA program in depth and the work that Bird Studies Canada does.
Thank you, Zoe. I hope everyone can hear me. If a few people could just type in the chat box that yes, you can hear me, that would set my mind at ease. And I'll get started. I see a few people typing there, so that's a good sign. Thank you. Okay, so here's what I have in mind for the next 20 minutes or so. First of all, to give you a very quick overview of Bird Studies Canada, so you have an idea of the organization and what we're working on and how it relates to the IBA program here in Alberta. Then I will get into details on the IBA program itself, both from a global and a national context, so that you can understand how your work fits into a much bigger picture that is much bigger than a local site. I'll tell you a bit about the major areas of focus of the IBA program nationally, and finally talk about some ways that you can help, where you can get involved, and of course that'll transition to Brook's talk, where you'll hear from an actual caretaker who is doing some of these things. So it's a very nice progression we have in mind here for you today. So Bird Studies Canada is based in Port Rowan, Ontario, on the lovely shores of Lake Erie. This is a picture of our national headquarters where I am based. The 40 hectare property was donated to us by a family, a local family. You can see the original farmhouse there on the left-hand side is still standing on the property. We use that for overflow office space. And there's the main building that was constructed in 2002. Our spring is quite a bit more advanced, I would imagine, than where you are. We've had our tundra swans come through already in large numbers on their way to the Arctic. The Long Point Bay is full of tens of thousands of ducks right now, and I've been away from the office for a couple of days, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were some early tree swallows around already. So spring is well underway where I am, and I hope that will come for you as well soon enough. A bit more about us. We were established originally as Long Point Bird Observatory in 1960. And as we started to take on more projects of a provincial and national scale, we decided it was time to become a national organization. And this happened in the late 1990s, right around the time that I started with BSE, actually. We have about 50 staff members. About half of those are based in the Port Rowan headquarters where I am, and another 25 are spread across 7 regional hubs in other provinces. Important to note is that our staff complement almost doubles during the summer breeding season for birds, and so we have a lot of summer staff on to help us with field work, especially in the summer period. So we're not a huge organization, therefore. To cover the whole country, we don't have really anything going on in the Arctic, for example. It's very expensive to work there, and we still don't have adequate strength in some bird groups, such as seabirds. But we're making progress and getting there. We run about 40 citizen science programs involving approximately 40,000 people every year. Some of the bigger ones that you may have heard of, or maybe you participate in these already, are the Christmas Bird Count, eBird, the Great Backyard Bird Count, Project Feeder Watch. Those are all continental scale, or in some cases global scale, monitoring programs where we are the Canadian partner along with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and sometimes the National Audubon Society in the US. But we are the Canadian coordinator of those large continental or global programs. Then we also have the Species at Risk projects that are localized to a particular province or region. We have a marsh monitoring program that runs in various parts of the country. We also run provincial scale breeding bird atlases. We've done what is it now, 5 of them in the last 15 years or something like that. And your neighbor, actually, Saskatchewan, is running one right now in year 2, and we have a website set up for that where you can see the results coming in on a daily basis. And I would encourage you to get involved in that atlas if you feel like going on a road trip. I'm sure they'd appreciate your help. Another big one is migration monitoring through the Canadian Migration Monitoring Network that we help to coordinate. And last but not least, the Important Bird and Biodiversity Areas program, what we're here to talk about today. And the reason we run that is because Bird Studies Canada, along with Nature Canada, are partners in BirdLife International, the agency that started this program 40 years ago. We renewed our strategic plan a little while ago, and we identified 5 major goals that we wanted to make progress on by 2020. And I've just bolded the one here that's applicable to today's talk: conserve Canada's IBAs through focused stewardship and monitoring. The other 4 there, you can read them. One has to do with our MOTIS radiotelemetry infrastructure that we've developed for the hemisphere to track bird species throughout their life cycles. Another is to reduce major threats to birds in Canada. Another pertains to growing our champion base for Canada's birds, getting more members essentially and more participants. And the last one there, engaging more with urban communities and underrepresented groups. So those are just 5 of the areas, and we're just talking about one of those today, the IBA program. So what is an IBA? Well, quite literally, they are the world's most important places for birds. And there's a whole complicated, confusing at times, set of criteria and rules and data and everything that's behind this. But all you really need to know is that there are 2 main types of IBAs that we have in Canada. One of them has to do with areas where large concentrations of birds gather. So one example is the Franklin's Gull at the Frank Lake IBA south of Calgary. And the second type has to do with where species at risk are located. And these can be species that are listed either by the IUCN on the red list, global red list. We don't have many of those in Canada. Or by CSIWIC. And in there we do have a lot of species that are listed, and we do have a lot of IBAs that harbor species at risk. So those are the 2 main types. And the broad goal of the program is to identify those sites, monitor them, and protect the world's most important sites for birds through stewardship and work on the ground, conservation action. So, yeah, as I was saying, this is coordinated by the BirdLife Partnership, or the BirdLife Secretariat in Cambridge, UK, and this map shows the 12,000 IBAs that have been identified so far in the 40-year history of the program. You can see some of them are marine sites out in the water, and the green ones are the terrestrial-based IBAs, and you can see Canada's global IBAs depicted on this map. And it's important to note that there are some 200 countries for which IBAs have been identified across the world in the last 4 decades. So it's a pretty major program, and was the first really of its kind to do this type of work. And other types of other groups have tried to come up with similar systems for plants and mammals and so on. But this is by far the biggest and the most comprehensive. So in terms of roles and responsibilities for the national program, Bird Studies Canada and Nature Canada are the 2 national partners that lead this work. We provide the overall direction and coordination of the program. We develop and maintain tools and standards so that what we're doing in British Columbia is comparable to what we're doing in Newfoundland. And so that we're speaking the same language where data and standards are concerned. Bird Studies Canada in particular has been leading on this, and we maintain the national database, the website, the maps, the various tools that all work together to help us do our job on IBAs, and that provincial organizations use and caretakers use, and so on. We also engage in national advocacy and communication, the two partners do, and another important job is to liaise back with BirdLife International in the UK so that they know what we're up to and vice versa, and that we converse about tools and the direction that the program is going at the global level and the Canadian level and so on. Then we also have regional partners such as Nature Alberta that help to implement the program on the ground in a given province or jurisdiction. And that can involve all manner of activities, including coordinating local conservation efforts, advocacy, monitoring, planning, feeding information back to the national partners, as well as recruiting and coordinating IBA caretakers. So a very important role to play with the regional partners. And we're very grateful for that. In terms of the broader IBA program and the priorities, some of the things that we have been working towards and will continue to work towards are improving the scientific, or strengthening the scientific credibility of the program. So what we want there is to have improved and current bird data for all of our sites, because the first thing that happens when a development is proposed is someone goes and looks at that site summary for the IBA, and if the data are out of date or they're wrong, or there's outdated information there, then it just weakens our case for conserving the site. So that's something we really put a lot of emphasis on and urge all of our partners to help us with. And this can involve reassessing boundaries, tweaking the boundaries of sites, making sure that they're relevant today, because these were developed some 15 years ago or even longer, and the threats have also changed over time, so we want to keep tabs on what's happening at each site so that we can do our best to conserve them. Second point, supporting a network of local stewards. This got started in about 2007 with British Columbia and then Quebec leading the way, but now we've got caretakers activated in just about all of the provinces, not in the far north, not in the territories, but in the south. An important part of that is integrating IBAs with other citizen science monitoring, like the ones I mentioned earlier that Bird Studies Canada does, especially things like eBird, where we are promoting the use of eBird for IBA monitoring. Another aspect is conservation action, so on-the-ground projects and advocacy that advance the conservation at sites. And a last point there, an emerging area, which involves broadening the scope beyond birds. So looking at these sites not only as important for birds, but as important for other groups of organisms, butterflies, amphibians, what have you. So that's a really important and emerging area for us. On the left there, you'll see the IBA Canada map showing all the IBAs in Canada. The name of our Facebook page, IBA Canada. There's nearly 600 sites, and 240 of them currently have caretakers. Some other points, 198 sites have some protection out of 600, so there's a long way to go where that is concerned. 62% of them are adequately monitored by some 5,700 people every year. I'll speak more about this in a coming slide. We've invested 20 years and millions of dollars in this program already, and we'd like to keep that going. Last point, which matches the graph here on this slide, there's a strong overlap with Casewick listed species. So this graph shows of all the Casewick listed species in Canada, what the overlap is with IBAs. And so if you just look at the bright blue part of each graph, each bar there, if we look at vascular plants, I think that I'm having trouble reading the number, but I think it says 56% or something, 58% or something like that. So 58% of all listed vascular plants in Canada overlap with IBAs. 65% of all mammals, listed mammals, overlap with IBAs. 77% of all listed birds overlap with IBAs. 70% of all listed amphibians and reptiles overlap with IBAs. So these data come from NatureServe and the conservation data centers that are present in each province. And so we've done this preliminary analysis to show just how important IBAs are, and hopefully make the case to decision makers and municipalities and so on that, you know, these aren't just sites that are important for birds. They're important for everything. And we'll be following up on this with some new work this year, actually, to promote this a little bit further. So getting back to the goal number 2, or strategic direction number 2 for Bird Studies Canada, habitats in 50% of Canada's important bird areas are conserved through stewardship and monitoring by 6,000 citizen scientists. We track this goal through these 4 indicators that you see here. And the first one, 2.1 IBA caretaker groups. As I mentioned, we've got about 240 of them now. And I'll soon be pestering all my regional colleagues to see if that number has changed and to see if we've moved up the dial towards 300, which is where we'd like to be by 2020. 2.2 concerns whether IBAs have been adequately monitored in the last 5 years. And in order for a site to be adequately monitored, it has to have been visited at least 3 times in the last 5 years. And so you can see our dial is doing quite well on this this indicator. I think we're up at 62% right now, and hoping to get up to, I think, 70% by 2020. So that just shows the importance of getting out regularly to your site. We ideally want a site to be visited every year. Sometimes that's not possible, but ideally we'd like a site to be visited every year so that we get a really good continuous data set. I'm just going to skip over 2.3 for a second and go to 2.4, citizen scientists monitoring IBAs. As you can see there, we're almost at 5,700 individual people visiting and monitoring IBAs every year, and we'd like that to get up to 6,000 by 2020. So hopefully some of you will take up the charge and help us boost that number and the other ones that you see here. And lastly, going back to 2.3 here, IBAs with at least 20% overlap with protected areas. We're pretty close to reaching our goal there, but admittedly it was a kind of low goal of only 200 sites, not all 600 we see as realistic. So this is the point of this is really just to show that whatever work you are doing on the ground, or you might be convinced to do in the future, it's all part of something bigger. It's all part of feeding into other processes and other decision making that has a bearing on what happens on the ground. And now I want to show you one of the most important resources on the IBA Canada website. I'll show you the URL is coming up in a later slide, but this is the IBA Canada website. It's just ibacanada.org. And I'm not able to do this live on this webinar, but I took some screen captures to show you, to give you an idea. So the main reason why people come to this site is to search this IBA directory of sites. You can do this in 2 ways. One is what is shown on the screen here now, the IBA site directory link there. And what I've done is just filtered to all the Alberta sites by typing in capital letters AB in the search box. That gives me all the Alberta sites. But you could also search by the name of the site or the code if you know the code. You can also flip over and search by species and do it that way. You can also search by map using the map viewer link there underneath the IBA site directory link. So there's numerous ways to navigate around here. But eventually, you'll come to the site summary for the site that you are interested in looking at. And this one is for Frank Lake that I mentioned earlier in High River, Alberta, south of Calgary. And every IBA has one of these pages that list a site description of where the site is, why it's important, the types of birds that are found there, the conservation issues, a little bit of information about where it is, the elevation, and so on. And then each site has these 5 graphic icons there that you can see in the center. The first one leads to either a Google map or to a printed PDF map that you can print out in color and take into the field with you for field notes. The second one has to do with it's a graphic that will depict the seasonal abundance of birds at this particular IBA, showing which parts of the year are important for particular for birds. Similarly, the next one does something similar except for annual frequency, so it shows over the years when species are present. Then there is a link to eBird Canada, where we want everyone who goes birding to record their locations. And then what we are able to do is harvest those locations and bring them back into the IBA database and get that data that you go out and harvest, that you go out and gather, rather. The last one has to do with protection status, so whether the site is protected or not, and what type of protection is there. I can't show you the whole the whole site summary here, so I've chopped it into 2. This is the bottom of that same page, and this is kind of the meat of the page right here, this bird table. And I don't know if you can read this very well, but you can go on the website later and look for yourself. But this shows the birds that have tripped an IBA criterion at this site. So all of these birds listed here meet an IBA, at least one IBA criterion. And so if we look at the first row in the record, Franklin's Gull, what it's showing is a date range there, 1971 to 2015, I think it says, in the spring season, and 10,000 to 23,000 birds have been observed in that time period, in that season. And you can see on the far right that those records that have been gathered so far have met both continental criteria and global. And then if you scroll down and look at others, you can find out the same information. So there's a northern pintail, trumpeter swan, tundra swan, and western grebe as species of interest at the site. On this page, again, I'd encourage you to just go on yourself and do some exploring. You can sort the data differently. Right now it's sorted alphabetically. You can sort it by taxonomic order. You can also sort by order of importance. So if right now it's sorted alphabetically, but I could change it around to say which of these species is most important at this site based on the proportion of the population that occurs there. So if a site could be really, really important for a particular species if it had 50% of its world population added or something like that. So there are different ways of looking at the data. You can go on yourself and look at that. This particular view of the data is called the summary view. You can also get a detailed view just by changing one of the drop-down menus there to details and then clicking refresh. And now I can go in and I can see from all those records that were entered for Franklin's Gull, I can see the individual records. So, and if you go across, you can see the number identified, or sorry, the number counted was 10,000, 1971 on the May 21st, I think it says, spring season. And then these columns tell you what the threshold is for global and for continental thresholds. And so sometimes the thresholds are the same, and sometimes they're different, depending on whether the species is confined only to North America, or rather the hemisphere, or whether it's a globally distributed species such as northern pintail. You get different numbers for what a 1% threshold would be for the world versus what a 1% threshold would be for the Americas. So that's just kind of background information if you want to get into that kind of stuff. And it also tells you where the data source came from in this reference column, so you can know that it's from eBird Canada, or if it's from a breeding bird atlas or what have you, you can get that information. So it's all there, and it's transparent for you and for decision makers to see. And here I just wanted to point out that this part of the website, this data discovery tool, is also available in a mobile-friendly configuration. It's not an app per se. It's not something that you can download to your device, but it's mobile-friendly in that it's been designed to work on iPads and tablets and your phone and whatever. You do need an internet connection for it, though. And so it's just a different interface. This is it here. This works on your computer too. You don't have to be on a mobile device to do this. And I actually like some of the features on here better than the desktop version. But it basically does the same thing, but it's organized a little bit differently. And there are some goodies on this mobile version that aren't present on the other, and vice versa. So it's there if you would like to explore. You can search in a similar way by site, by species, or by map. Yeah, and here we are again for Frank Lake, showing the species list. And here the default is actually to show by area, by importance rather than alphabetically. And then if we were online, we could actually check and see what the numbers were of trumpeter swan in any given year that they've been recorded here, and we could figure out what the proportion was if we wanted to. The different colors denote different levels of significance. So that's available, and I'd encourage you to poke around there and look at that. So I'm getting close to the end now. Caretakers, of course, are a major fixture of the IBA program. Here's our map of the IBAs that have caretakers assigned as of a couple years ago, I think. And naturally, we'd like to see that map fill in and become a lot more full with red dots. So how can you help? Well, we've already talked about monitoring bird populations at IBAs using eBird. You can work to protect IBAs and undertake conservation actions. You can help with educational materials and interpretive signs. This is a really popular one with a lot of people, as is organizing events and surveys, going out and doing nature walks and bio blitzes and so on. But you should also communicate with us and with your regional IBA coordinator about what's happening with bird populations, habitats, threats, and conservation. Importantly, we would really like you to share your stories, your photos, and videos from your IBA visits with your regional IBA coordinator and the IBA social media channels. I think if I don't have it here, I will just mention, yes, I do mention it here. We have both a Facebook page at the national level, but also an important bird and biodiversity areas Facebook group for sharing photos. And this is where we'd really like you to join the group. And whenever you go out to an IBA, just post a photo or video of what you're seeing and with a little bit of commentary, and you'll be surprised at how interested people are from other parts of the country about what's happening at your IBA. So you can just search for that on Facebook and you'll find it. On the national website, you can find all the monitoring protocols and forms, a guide for using eBird, the data and the maps like we just talked about, and also a caretaker manual that kind of wraps it all up into one package. I'd also encourage you to sign up for news at IBA at birdscanada.org, and you could also watch the national video. That's you can find that on the IBAcanada.org website, and also the websites of Bird Studies.
All right. Thank you so much, Andrew, for that great presentation on the IBA program and the work that Bird Studies Canada does. So now that we know a little more about the IBA program, we're going to go into more depth about the Grassland Region IBAs and the roles and responsibilities of caretakers in Alberta. So the Grassland Region covers approximately 14% of the province of Alberta. It encompasses the southern part of the province east of the Rocky Mountains. Grasslands are comprised mostly of plains, rolling hills, and badlands, and are considered the most at-risk natural region in Alberta due to conversion of land for agriculture and urban development. They are made up of grasses and some shrubs and have the warmest and driest climate in the province. This region has the highest proportion of endangered species within Alberta, which includes burrowing owls, sage grouse, and ferruginous hawks. So IBA caretakers are local volunteers who are matched with one or more important bird and biodiversity area. So caretakers ensure that changes within IBAs and any threats to their ecological integrity are properly documented and help to promote their resolution. Caretakers will be familiar with and situated close to the IBA and possess the means to visit the IBA with some frequency. So I'll briefly go into the caretaker responsibilities, and then Brooke will be giving a bit of a presentation on that as well. So caretakers in Alberta have a number of responsibilities, including making at minimum one visit to the IBA each year during times in which bigger species, so species that earned the IBA its status, are present. Ideally, caretakers would visit the IBAs during different seasons such as spring migration, summer nesting and staging, and fall migration. Also, they are responsible for uploading data to eBird, filling out the annual site summary using the template provided by Nature Alberta, and send it to birds@naturealberta.ca, advising Nature Alberta of any serious and significant threats to the site, maintaining regular communication with Nature Alberta, compiling historic data for the IBA site, encouraging others to collect information at the IBA site, reviewing and ensuring the quality of the data of the IBA site. So there are 10 IBA caretakers in the 47 IBAs in Alberta. So one of the goals of this webinar is to raise awareness about this program and increase the number of caretakers in Alberta. So this map shows you all the different IBAs that have caretakers currently. And so if you're interested in joining the IBA program as a caretaker, you can email info@naturealberta.ca for more information. We will have that email address on the last slide of the presentation so that you can write it down. And yeah, now I will pass the presentation on to our next presenter, Brooke, who will discuss the Grassland region in more depth and her experiences as an active IBA caretaker.
Thank you, Zoe. I hope everyone can hear me. Hello to everyone from Lethbridge. It's pretty hard to imagine that spring is coming right now because it is really snowing outside my window. But the robins were pretty busy this morning, so spring must be coming. I'm just going to share a little bit more context in regards to Grassland IBAs and some of the threats they're facing. And then I'm going to talk more about what my specific roles and responsibilities are as it relates to one of the IBAs which I care for, called Lake Newell. So just to give some more context here, there's roughly 20 grassland IBAs in Alberta, depending on where you make that cutoff. And they cover over 5,600 square kilometers of the province. This equates to roughly 6% of Alberta's total grassland natural region. And as Zoe mentioned, this is an at-risk ecosystem, as about 70 to 80% of Alberta's grasslands have already been lost to agriculture and other sorts of developments. And so the 6% that these IBAs represent is holds massive conservation value to this at-risk prairie ecosystem. Grassland IBAs have a wide variety of characteristics. They're very disparate in size, habitat type, and the species that are found. For example, Schultz Lake is Alberta's smallest IBA, and it covers just over 3 square kilometers, whereas the Suffield IBA, one of Alberta's largest in the Grasslands region, covers over 460 square kilometers. I also have images here of 2 different IBAs. The left one is of Chappis Lake near Medicine Hat, and that one's simply a series of alkaline mud flats and a couple of dugouts. And I also have an image of the Milk River Canyon IBA. And this one is characterized by limestone hoodoos and other badland formations. So there's a wide variety of different habitat types in these areas. And so with these unique characteristics of each IBA in the region comes some conservation challenges as well as some benefits to each of them. Some of the largest challenges that I think grassland IBAs are facing are, first of all, the need to moderate disturbance. This image here was taken at Pukokee Lake IBA in the Grasslands region, and as you can see, it is in a highly developed area. And so the need to balance the disturbances that these sites face, as well as the need to balance the many land uses that many of them have, becomes quite apparent in this photo here. Another unique thing of prairie IBAs is that many of them are what I would call IPAs, or important people areas. And what I mean by that is the Grasslands region is a heavily modified region. And so many of these sites are either directly influenced, maintained, or even developed as a result of human influences. And so there's a lot of multi-land use activities going on at a lot of these sites. And another main challenge that I think these sites face is just a general lack of awareness. Just like this image shows here, a lot of these sites, because of where they are in relation to human developments, are not exactly the poster image when you think of a biologically rich area. And so I think that a lot of the people that use these sites are unaware of just how important they are in terms of biodiversity. However, there are some beneficial characteristics of grassland IBAs as they relate to conservation. The first is what I call the close to home factor. And what I mean by that is many of these sites, since they are in more developed areas, are a lot closer than you realize. One thing that became quite apparent to me when I first started with the IBA program about 4 years ago was just how many IBAs are close to me. I simply had no idea. And these aren't remote sites that you would need to get helicoptered in, like in the Northern Boreal or anything like that. Many of these sites are a simple drive off of the #1 highway. And I think the greatest benefit that these sites have is the fact that we have the power and we have the influence over these sites. Many of the threats imposed on these IBAs are as a direct result of our own activities. And as a result, we have just as much of the power to reverse these threats. So I'm just going to go over generally what my roles as an IBA caretaker are, and then I'll dive more into this later on. But the roles of IBA caretakers can differ greatly, and it all comes down to what your interests and strengths are. So what my 3 roles are is to collect biological data at my designated IBAs, to report this information to Nature Alberta and other agencies, and lastly, but arguably most important, to advocate for these sites and the program. So I'm just going to highlight what my roles and responsibilities are as they relate to Lake Newell IBA, which is one of 2 IBAs that I am currently monitoring. Lake Newell is located in the dry mixed grass prairie region of southern Alberta. So it's characterized by very hot, dry summers. It encompasses about 115 square kilometers of native and modified grasslands, shrublands, and marshlands, as well as extensive amounts of open water, which is a particularly rare thing in this corner of the province. The site is situated just a few minutes south of the town of Brook, for those of you who are familiar with that area. And as you can see by this aerial image, the surrounding landscape is dominated heavily by agricultural developments. And this lends to the IBA being, again, an IPA, or important people area, as it is used extensively for irrigational water, as well as it's a very popular recreational destination in southeastern Alberta, since large water bodies are very few and far between. And so there's a lot of power boating, swimming, and pretty much anything else you can think of to do on a lake. It happens here. It's also important to note that a portion of the IBA is protected as it falls within Kinbrook Island Provincial Park. So this is just an image of some typical prairie habitat in the IBA with an eastern kingbird there. Here's some typical marshland habitat. There is an extensive amount of cattails and other great aquatic habitat throughout the lake. And this is just an example of some shrubland that the area has. So this picture actually shows a portion of a trail system that is located within Kinbrook Island Provincial Park. And it's a great way to see all of these habitats in one go. It's about a 6-kilometer loop, and it's primarily how I survey the site. Lake Newell was designated as an IBA for a number of reasons. It has both at-risk species as well as large numbers of other species. So the site has had continentally significant numbers of the chestnut-collared longspur on the left there, which is actually a federally threatened species, as well as large congregations of the whimbrel, which are far-distant Arctic migrants. The site has actually had globally significant numbers of black-bellied plovers as well, which are also long-distance Arctic migrants, as well as significant numbers of breeding Sprague's pipits, which are, again, a federally threatened species. And so there's a trend here in that Lake Newell is not just important for our local breeding birds, but it's a very important stopover location for other migrants as well. The lake is also very important for a wide array of colonial nesting species. Hundreds, if not thousands, of ring-billed and California gulls have been observed, as well as large numbers of American white pelicans, double-crested cormorants, western and eared grebes, Caspian and common terns. So a large number of different colonial nesting birds. The site is not just important for birds, however. There have been significant numbers of the Great Plains toad found in the area, which is a species of special concern in the province, as well as it's also a site for the slender mouse earcress, which is the flower above the toad there. It's a federally threatened species, and in fact, the IBA is one of only 3 known locations for the flower in Alberta. And then the other flower here found in the IBA, although I have yet to come across it, is the water hyssop. And this is especially important as this is quite possibly the only location of this plant in all of Canada. So it's a very special place, and I hope I'm starting to paint a very different picture of this site than the irrigation reservoir that many people just see it as. Lake Newell is, of course, not without its threats. There is extensive agricultural development, as you saw with that earlier image, as well as energy developments. Although a portion of the IBA is protected by Kinbrook Island Provincial Park, there are oil and gas wells almost straight off of the water outside of the park. There's also a significant amount of recreational disturbance. This picture was taken in Rolling Hills Reservoir, which is the smaller water body of the IBA. And so this is one of 2 campgrounds within the single IBA. And so you can imagine with that comes a lot of disturbance, such as people talking, dogs, generators, anything you can imagine that goes on in a campground. And that's sure to have some implications. Another potential threat to this site is invasive species. I have come across some invasive plants just kind of along the campgrounds and whatnot, but not to too bad of a degree. However, there is the looming threat of aquatic invasive species, since it is a very popular boating destination in the province. Particularly when we're talking about zebra mussels. There's quite a high potential for those to become present in the IBA. And so as a result of that, Kinbrook Island Provincial Park is part of the Provincial Aquatic Invasive Species Prevention Program. And so they do inspect all watercraft that enter or leave the water body throughout the boating season. So now that I've kind of given you some context into Lake Newell and what it's all about, I can now describe in greater detail what my roles as an IBA caretaker entail. So the first role that I have is to collect biological data within the IBAs. And to do this, I will usually conduct 2 visits per year, preferably more. I try to time these with the spring and fall migrations when it's likely I'm going to encounter the most number of species. At this time, I record all individuals of birds seen or heard, as well as any mammals, such as that little least weasel, amphibians, or anything else of that nature. I try to also record any plants of interest that I come across. This collecting of biological data is especially important as I've noticed when reviewing data on eBird at a later time that there are many instances in which my IBA report is actually the only data for some of these sites at certain times of the year. And so it's really important to get out there and really monitor your IBAs as much as you can really be filling in an important knowledge gap, especially in the winter. So once I finish my survey and get back home from my adventure, I then fill out an eBird Canada report. So this is fairly straightforward. You simply just put in all of the species and individuals observed or heard. When filling in an eBird report for an IBA visit, there is a special IBA Canada protocol that you follow. And it basically just means that you ensured that you surveyed as much as the area as possible and that you did your due diligence in avoiding any double counts. Once I fill out this, I share it with Nature Alberta so that they also know what I have found. The second part of reporting my data is completing the Caretakers Reporting form. It's a bit lengthy of a document, but it's only filled out once annually. So in this form, I again report any of the species that I've found, whether that be birds, mammals, plants, etc. I also, in this document, highlight any conservation concerns that I may have come across. So this may be, there was some trees cut down, or there's a new energy development taking place, things of that nature. And lastly, I also highlight habitat quality as it relates to different guilds of birds. So for example, I may rate wetland habitat as excellent. There's very extensive cover as it relates to waterfowl. However, that's probably not the best habitat when it comes to prairie songbirds. And so this form gets sent to Nature Alberta, Nature Canada, and Bird Studies Canada. And this form is really important as it feeds back into that IBA site that Andrew walked us through a little bit. So it's really important to update this sheet annually so that the information for the IBA on the internet is also up to date. My last role as an IBA caretaker is advocating for my sites as well as the program as a whole. I've done this in a number of ways throughout the years. I've been fortunate enough to contribute online articles and blog entries highlighting different IBAs in the Grasslands region, as well as been fortunate enough to contribute articles to the Nature Alberta quarterly publication. I've actually been the acting assistant editor for the magazine for the past 3 years, and so that gives me the very unique opportunity to contribute and find articles highlighting conservation challenges and successes for these sites, as well as any key species or other interesting features. I've also extended the IBA program to the Lethbridge College during my time there, and through that I was able to make the wildlife group within the college an additional IBA caretaker for a nearby site. So word of mouth and advocacy can go a long way in expanding the caretaker network. I'll just end off my segment by saying that my time as an IBA caretaker has been very rewarding. It's given me the opportunity to participate in a science-based conservation initiative. And as a result, I've developed a number of field skills as well as improved my local knowledge of the region. Every time I take a new back road or visit a new site, I learn something a little new about the province. I've also built a number of great connections over the years, whether that's very passionate people from Nature Alberta or just a curious landowner. I've met some fantastic people that are want to get involved more in conservation. And of course, the most important thing is that it's a total blast. It's a lot of fun. I can't imagine spending a spring morning doing anything else rather than birding and helping my province maintain a little bit of biodiversity. And so with that, I'll hand things back to Zoe.
Great. Well, thank you, Brooke, so much for that wonderful presentation on the Grassland region and your experience as an IBA caretaker. So just to finish off the presentation, I have a little bit of stuff I'd like to talk about Nature Kids. It is close to 1 o'clock. If you do need to sign off, by all means, we are recording this presentation, and we will hopefully have it up on our Nature Alberta website sometime in the near future. So feel free if you do need to log off at 1 o'clock. Yeah, so I'm just going to go into a little bit of detail about the Nature Kids program, just because we see a link between the IBA program and Nature Kids. So the link that we see with the IBA program and Nature Kids is that Nature Kids promotes being outdoors, observing nature, scientific investigation, environmental stewardship, and healthy living. We see the families of Nature Kids exploring the IBAs across Alberta, and we are planning to host a number of events in the IBAs. So to give you a little bit of background on what Nature Kids is all about, we offer primarily a membership-based program to families and children aged 4 to 12 across Alberta, but we also offered nature-based events to the public across the province. So with a family membership, families receive a nature magazine for kids called Nature Wild that comes out quarterly. Kids will also become part of the Nature Heroes program, which is an at-home nature-based program where kids work through levels of nature activities and earn prizes upon completion, and the families will also have access to Explorer Days, which are nature field trips offered in all of our chapters. So we currently have 8 active chapters across the province, so one in Edmonton, Calgary, Morinville, Red Deer, Lakeland, Grand Prairie, Athabasca, and the Stettler-Erskine area, with volunteer chapter leaders planning and hosting nature-based field trips every month. Our free public nature events are called Family Nature Nights, and these are offered through July and August, and one in the winter in Edmonton. We're also going to be piloting a new project where we will host one BioBlitz event in each of our non-Edmonton chapters. This is where we see a link to the IBA program, where we can take families out to these areas to learn more about the birds and biodiversity within their local environment. So we also attend outreach events across the province, including the International Migratory Bird Day at Lesser Slave Lake Bird Observatory and the Snow Goose Chase near Beaver Hill. We come to these events with activities, games, and crafts suitable for kids aged 4 to 12. So Nature Kids is planning to do more excursions to IBAs in order to increase the awareness of the IBA program to families across Alberta. So that is all we have for today. So on this slide, we do have the email address that you can send a note to if you are interested in joining the IBA Caretaker network here in Alberta. If you do have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box there, and we'd be happy to answer them for you. I will stay on for 5 or 10 minutes if there are any questions, but I'd just like to say thank you so much for coming and attending our webinar. This is the last of this series, but we're hoping to do more webinars in the future, so stay tuned for that. So thank you so much for coming. Have a great weekend, and hopefully spring will be just around the corner for ones up here in Edmonton. Thanks, have a great day. Okay, so I see I have one question here from GMJ. So they asked, how does one get an area designated as an IBA? So that might be something that Andrew would be able to answer. I don't know, Andrew, if you want to answer it now, or maybe you can connect. Oh, here it's Gigi. So I don't know if you could connect Gigi with some information, or if you wanted to answer the question now, by all means. I don't know the full details about how to go about that, but yeah, Andrew, you might be able to help out with that.
Yeah, sure, Zoe. Thanks for the question. We did a big round of identification back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I mean, I'll be upfront at saying we're not really encouraging the identification of new sites right now, unless they're truly outstanding ones. So that said, I mean, it's possible that we could establish new ones. We've done some amalgamations of sites and created new sites that way, but we haven't really we really haven't embarked on any kind of new process for identifying new areas. But if we were to do that, it would require a lot of intensive data gathering over a number of years to establish that yes, these birds are there regularly and in significant numbers according to the criteria, and so on. So it wouldn't be something that would be done lightly or quickly, for sure. It would be something that would be done over a period of years, let's say. So I'm not ruling it out entirely, but it's certainly not something that we're encouraging or pushing at this point. We really want to. We feel like we haven't done a good enough job of being active at the ones we do have already and working towards conserving those. So I don't know if that answers your question adequately, but that's kind of the situation right now. And you can email me further if you want to discuss it further. Yeah, I'll type in my address for you.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, so he'll type out his address, his email address there for you, Gigi, and hopefully he'll be able to answer all of your questions about the lake in particular. Are there any other questions? Right, so it looks pretty quiet in the chat, so feel free to log out whenever you're ready. And again, thank you for coming, and have a great Easter weekend, everyone.
I'll just say thanks, Zoe, for organizing these webinars. You did a great job.
Thank you so much for attending all 3 webinars, Andrew. Oh, and Brook's already gone, but thank you, Brook, for presenting today. Yeah, thanks, everybody.